Kyros Dominion did not believe in miracles. They believed in the Aurelion, the eternal sun. For 10,000 years, the massive Dyson sphere had encased their home star, capturing every photon of energy to power a civilization that spanned 12 systems. To the Kyros, the Aurelion was not a machine. It was a divine inheritance, a gift from the architects who had ascended to a higher plane before time began. High Priest Zol Aris stood on the observation spire, his 4 eyes fixed on the golden horizon of the sphere. His job was to lead the daily prayers of gratitude, ensuring the population remained loyal to the light. But today, the light was wrong. A shudder, deep and tectonic, vibrated through the spire's crystal floor. Then, for the first time in recorded history, the Aurelion flickered. It was only for a millisecond, but the psychic shock sent millions of Kyros to their knees. In that brief moment of darkness, the entire Dominion felt the cold breath of the void. The eternal sun was failing. "Report!" Zol Aris barked, his bioluminescent skin flashing a panicked violet. "Tell the sages to recalibrate the harmonic resonance. The sun is displeased." "It's not a spiritual misalignment, High Priest," the lead sage shouted, his hands flying over a control console he barely understood. "The energy output has dropped by 40%. The internal cooling vanes are seizing up. If the temperature continues to rise inside the shell, the Aurelion won't just go dark, it will explode." The Dominion was a master of many things: art, philosophy, and orbital combat. But they had no idea how to fix the source of their life. They were like children living in a palace, unaware of how the plumbing worked. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the alarms on the bridge. It wasn't the rhythmic chime of a Kyros computer. It was a low, distorted burst of static, a primitive radio frequency that hadn't been used in the sector for eons. Zol Aris leaned over the console. "Is that a distress signal from a neighboring system?" The sage shook his head, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No, High Priest. The signal is coming from inside the Aurelion's core maintenance conduits. And it's a voice." The audio cleared, revealing a flat, weary tone that sounded utterly unimpressed by the impending apocalypse. "Testing, 1, 2. Is this thing still broadcasting on the legacy band? Look, if anyone is actually listening to this, you've got a massive buildup of carbon scoring on the primary intake valves. I'm seeing a critical service light blinking on my dash, and if you don't clear the line in the next 10 minutes, the whole grid is going to hard reboot. Also, quit it with the chanting. It's vibrating the pipes." Zol Aris felt his heart stop. The voice was speaking a dialect of a primitive species from the Rim, a species known as humans. "Trace that signal," Zol Aris ordered. "Find the architect who speaks." "It's not an architect, sir," the sage whispered, pointing at the long-range scanners. "It's a single rusted ship approaching the outer access hatch. It's registered as a mobile repair unit." The small, boxy human ship, the Grease Monkey, approached the trillion-ton Dyson sphere. Compared to the Aurelion, it was a speck of dust. But as it got closer, the god tech of the sphere didn't fire its automated defenses. Instead, the massive sacred blast doors, which hadn't moved in 10 millennia, simply hissed open to let the human in. High Priest Zol Aris realized with a surge of terror that the gods hadn't left the galaxy. They had just moved into the basement to keep the lights on. High Priest Zol Aris remained on his knees, all 4 of his eyes squeezed shut in desperate prayer. Around him, hundreds of sages sang hymns to the eternal sun, trying to soothe the angry spirit of the machine. To the Kyros, the Dyson sphere was the Aurelion, a living god that gave life to 12 systems. Every spark and every vibration in the temple walls was treated as a sacred prophecy. But the sound that followed was no prophecy. It was a noise that made Zol Aris's skin turn a mottled, sickly shade of violet. "Hello? Can anyone hear me on this frequency? Look, your pressure gauges are redlining, and your intake filters are so clogged they haven't been touched since the Big Bang. If you don't open service hatch 4B right now, this whole sector is going to go dark in 3, 2. Suddenly, the massive gold-plated gates, the entrance to the Creator's abode, emitted a loud metallic screech. Hydraulics that hadn't moved in 10,000 years spat out a cloud of ancient steam and rust. The heavy doors slowly groaned open, revealing not a divine light but a smoky, cramped corridor filled with the smell of grease and burnt electronics. A man stepped out of the haze, out of the ye. He wore a stained blue jumpsuit with a faded patch that read, "Vane Sterling Maintenance." He held a massive, heavy pipe wrench and was rubbing the back of his neck as he looked at the golden altars with an expression of deep, professional disappointment. "Are you people serious?" Vane asked, staring at the priests who were frozen in silent shock. "You blocked the ventilation shafts with altars? Who decided to hang a religious incense burner on a fire sprinkler? This is a massive safety violation." Zol Aris, barely finding his voice, whispered, "Are you the messenger of the architects? Have you come to renew our world with your blessing?" Vane looked at him like he was losing his mind. "Friend, I came because a red light started blinking in my shop on the other side of the sector. My family has been looking after this light for 2,000 years. We are the hereditary mechanics of this grid. And judging by what I'm seeing, you've made a total mess of the place. Have you ever even changed the oil in the primary rotors?" He walked toward the central terminal, a massive interface the priests were afraid to even look at directly. Vane didn't sing or offer a sacrifice. He simply raised his fist and slammed it hard against the side of the control panel. The screens, which for centuries had displayed only mysterious religious symbols, suddenly flickered and switched to a standard diagnostic map in English. "Yeah, just as I thought," Vane muttered, his face suddenly turning grim. The weary humor vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a professional who had just spotted a catastrophe. "It's not just poor maintenance. Someone intentionally bypassed the emergency relief valves. And according to the flow rate, they're still inside the system." At that moment, the light in the massive hall shifted from a warm gold to a frantic, pulsing red. The walls of the sphere began to vibrate so violently that precious gems started falling from the altars. Vane gripped his wrench tighter and looked up toward the dark maintenance alcoves near the ceiling, where cold blue lights began to glow. The eyes of something that wasn't supposed to be there. "Get back, priests," Vane said, his voice turning into cold steel. "We've got a localized infestation, and these guests aren't here for the service." The blue-eyed shadows detached themselves from the vaulted ceilings of the primary core chamber. These were the Obsidian Swarm, a race of nomadic digital parasites that survived by bleeding the energy of lesser civilizations. For centuries, they had stayed hidden in the dark corners of the Aurelion, slowly draining the Dyson sphere's power while the Kyros Dominion prayed to it. Now that a human had arrived to fix the leak, they were no longer content to hide. "Sacrilege!" High Priest Zol Aris shrieked, cowering behind a golden pillar as the first swarm assassin hit the floor. The creature was a nightmare of shifting liquid metal and glowing circuits, its arm elongating into a humming energy blade. "The shadows of the void have come to consume the sun." Vane Sterling didn't shriek. He didn't pray. He just looked at the approaching assassin and spat on the floor. "You're not shadows," Vane growled, adjusting his grip on the heavy pipe wrench. "You're just vermin in the pipes, and I've got a zero-tolerance policy for infestation." The swarm assassin lunged, its movement a blur of unnatural speed. A Kyros guard tried to intervene, firing a ceremonial plasma rifle. The shot passed harmlessly through the assassin's shifting body. The swarm didn't exist in a fully physical state. They were phase-shifted, making them immune to the Dominion's sophisticated energy weapons. The assassin's blade swung for Vane's neck. Vane didn't dodge. He stepped in, closing the distance. He swung the massive iron wrench in a short, brutal arc. To the horror of the Kyros priests, the wrench didn't pass through the creature. It connected with the sound of a sledgehammer hitting an anvil. The assassin's energy shield shattered like glass, and its liquid metal head was flattened by the sheer, low-tech mass of the human tool. The creature collapsed into a heap of sparking, inert slag. "How?" Zol Aris gasped, his eyes wide. "Our most sacred beams could not touch them." "Simple physics," Vane grunted, already looking for the next target. "Your weapons use the same frequency as the sphere's power grid. These parasites are tuned to that frequency. They just absorb it. But they can't phase through 5 kilograms of solid, high-density Terran iron. It's too slow, too heavy, and too real for their sensors to compute." Above them, the docking bay sensors chimed. Vane's ship, the Grease Monkey, had finished its automated docking sequence. The rusted boxy vessel didn't look like much, but as it locked into the Aurelion's architect port, the ship's external defense turrets, primitive mechanical slug throwers, began to roar. They weren't firing bolts of light. They were firing solid lead. The Obsidian Swarm, used to fighting civilizations that relied on elegant energy weapons, were being torn apart by kinetic projectiles. It was a slaughter of the advanced by the obsolete. Vane tapped his earcom. "Molly, start the purge cycle. Flush the conduits with liquid nitrogen. Let's see how these digital ghosts handle a cold shower." "Copy that, Vane." A dry AI voice crackled back. Initiating the exterminator protocol. Also, you have a call on line 2 from the Kyros Admiralty. They're threatening to blow us up for violating the sacred gates. Vane looked at the panicked Zol Ares and then at the redlining core terminal. Tell them to wait in line. I'm busy. Suddenly, a massive booming vibration shook the entire sphere. It wasn't a mechanical failure this time. Something enormous had just latched onto the outside of the Dyson sphere. Something much larger than the grease monkey. Vane's face went pale. He checked his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. That's not a repair ship. That's a swarm hive ship. They're not just bleeding the sun anymore, they're trying to crack it open. The roar of the obsidian swarm hive ship docking vibrated through the entire structure of the Dyson sphere like thunder inside a metal planet. The golden walls of the Aurelion, which had not known a single scratch for 10,000 years, shuddered violently. High Priest Zol Ares fell to his knees, his bioluminescent skin pulsing a panicked, sickly gray. "They are breaching the sanctuary!" he cried, shielding his eyes. "The architects are enraged! This is the end of all light!" Vane Sterling didn't even flinch. He stood by the central pedestal that the priest called the Altar of the Eternal Flame. In reality, it was an emergency pressure release terminal, buried under centuries of offerings. Flowers, precious gems, and dried incense. "This isn't a sanctuary, and it isn't the wrath of gods," Vane spat, sweeping a pile of golden jewelry off the control panel. "This is just a solar farm clogged with trash, and your shadows are just cosmic bedbugs looking for free electricity." He wound up and, with all his might, slammed his heavy wrench against a massive metal pipe protruding from the floor. A sharp clang echoed under the high vaults. The priests gasped in horror, expecting to be vaporized on the spot for such blasphemy. But instead of lightning, the pipe emitted a long, relieved hiss. The system pressure began to drop immediately. "What have you done, barbarian?" Zol Ares shrieked. "You touched the vessel of life with unclean metal." "I unjammed a valve," Vane replied, wiping sweat from his forehead with a greasy rag. "Your prayers created so much vibration that the sediment clogged the fuel lines. Now listen to me, Your Holiness. We have a breach in Sector 9, and digital parasites are crawling through it. If they reach the main bus, they'll drain this star into a white dwarf in under an hour." Vane stepped toward the main screen, which now glowed with crisp engineering schematics instead of religious mandalas. He punched in a short command, and the floor in the center of the hall began to slide open. The priest scrambled away screaming as a massive pulsing blue core rose from the depths. It was the heart of the Aurelion, an antimatter chamber that stabilized the star's energy. "It is the heart of God," Zol Ares whispered, blinded by the radiance. "It's a Mark IV fuel pump," Vane corrected him, "and it's held together by a prayer, literally. My ancestors designed this thing to run forever, but they didn't count on it being maintained by people who think the user manual is holy scripture." Vane inserted his rusted wrench into a specific slot on the core. Unexpectedly, the metal of the wrench and the core's panel began to glow with the same soft sapphire light. The machine recognized the tool. It recognized the creator's DNA. "System activated. User Sterling, Vane. Access confirmed." A calm, synthesized female voice announced over the speakers, causing the priest to fall prostrate once again. But the triumph was short-lived. The ceiling of the hall suddenly exploded in a rain of molten gold. A massive black spike from the hive ship pierced the vault and slammed into the floor just meters from the core. From the cracks in the spike, a black, shimmering liquid began to leak out. The obsidian swarm was beginning a direct viral injection into the heart of the star. Vane gripped his wrench and braced himself for a fight. "Zol Ares, if you want your sun to rise tomorrow, grab your golden staff and hit anything that looks like liquid metal. Because right now, we're going to perform a system cleanup." Manually. The black, shimmering liquid oozing from the hive ship's spike didn't behave like a spill. It behaved like a predatory nervous system. As it touched the golden floor of the core chamber, it didn't pool. It branched, forming intricate, jagged patterns that pulsed with a cold, sickly blue light. It was a digital virus made physical, designed to rewrite the Aurelion's subroutines from the inside out. "It's beautiful," one of the junior sages whispered, stepping forward in a trance. "The shadows are merging with the light." "Get back, you idiot!" Vane Sterling yelled, grabbing the sage by the collar of his silk robes and yanking him backward. "That beauty is a polymorphic code eater. It's not merging, it's digesting." Vane slammed his wrench into a manual override lever on the side of the core. The sapphire light of the chamber intensified, and a hum of pure power vibrated through the floor. Zol Aris, tell your men to form a perimeter around the primary cooling ducts. If that black sludge touches the coolant, the heat exchange will fail, and will all be vaporized in a localized supernova. The high priest, normally a figure of absolute composure, was trembling. He raised his golden staff, which emitted a faint, decorative shimmer. Guard the veins of the sun, for the architects. The Kyros guards moved, but they were outclassed. As the obsidian swarm began to manifest physical forms from the black liquid, scuttling, multi-limbed horrors made of shifting shards, the guards' energy weapons proved useless. The swarm simply absorbed the plasma bolts, growing larger and more stable with every shot. Vane, meanwhile, was buried waist-deep in a maintenance crawlspace beneath the core terminal. Molly, I need a diagnostic on the breach. How did they get through the external shielding? Those plates are 3 meters of reinforced carbon steel. Analyzing Vane. The AI's voice crackled, distorted by the rising electromagnetic interference. The breach wasn't forced by external pressure. The hive ship's spike utilized a maintenance key signature. It didn't break in. The Aurelion invited it in. Vane froze. His grease-stained hands went still on the wiring. A maintenance key? Only my family and the High Sages have those codes. And I'm the only Sterling left in this sector. He looked up through the floor grating just in time to see the lead sage, the one who had been praying the hardest, standing near a secondary terminal. The sage wasn't praying now. He was holding a glowing violet data crystal, inserting it into a hidden port that shouldn't have existed. Zol Aris, your lead sage is the one bleeding the system, Vane shouted, scrambling out of the crawlspace. The traitorous sage turned, his face twisted in a look of fanatical ecstasy. The architects promised a reset. The Dominion has grown stagnant. We must return to the darkness to be reborn in a truer light. The swarm is the great eraser. Before the guards could react, the sage completed the upload. The golden walls of the chamber turned a bruised, angry purple. Suddenly, the gravity plating beneath their feet groaned and reversed. Vane was slammed against the ceiling, his wrench clattering away across the rafters. As he hung upside down, watching the black liquid metal of the swarm begin to crawl up the walls toward the core, Vane realized the stakes had just doubled. This wasn't just a repair job anymore. The Holy Sages had turned the galaxy's largest power source into a timed explosive, and they had just handed the detonator to a swarm of hungry ghosts. Molly? Vane wheezed, fighting the crushing G-force of the malfunctioning gravity. Tell me we have a plan B. B requires a manual reboot of the entire Dyson sphere, Vane. But there's a catch. To do it, you have to enter the God Room, the space between the star and the inner shell. And the temperature in there is currently 6,000 degrees. Gravity in the core chamber had completely inverted, pinning Vane Sterling against the golden ceiling. His lungs burned from the thinning air, and his eyes stung from the unbearable radiance bleeding out of the unsealed antimatter chamber. Below him, or above him from his perspective, the obsidian swarm continued to devour the heart of God, turning the divine light into a bruised, pulsing purple rot. Molly! Vane wheezed into his comms, gripping a decorative ledge to keep from falling into the solar fire. I need the solar dredge suit. Now. Vane, that suit was designed for short-term corona walks, not for fighting a digital plague at the epicenter of a meltdown, the AI assistant replied. Your survival probability at 6,000 degrees is currently 11%. And that's if you remain perfectly still. I like those odds, Vane grunted. Drop it through the ventilation shaft. A second later, a heavy metal container shot out of a technical hatch. Vane caught it mid-air, nearly losing his grip on the ledge. Within seconds, he had climbed inside the massive, clunky pressure suit. It looked more like a deep-sea diving bell from the 20th century than a piece of high-tech space armor. This was a Sterling heirloom, old, reliable, built for the kind of work where all modern electronics failed. High Priest Zol Aris, clinging to a support column below, watched with a mix of terror and religious awe. To him, the man in this suit looked like an ancient titan preparing to do battle with chaos itself. Are you truly going in there? The priest shouted. Into the space between the sphere and the star? That is pure flame. That is the wrath of the architects. It's just a high-temperature workspace, Vane snapped, slamming the heavy faceplate of his helmet shut. And your architects forgot to install an automated virus purge system. So now I have to be the antivirus. Vane stepped to the edge of the platform, Directly beneath him, shielded only by flickering force fields, churned a sea of white-hot plasma. The black infection of the swarm had already stretched its tentacles toward the manual reboot levers located on the inner shell's primary heat sink. He jumped. The fall felt like an eternity. The suit's thermal plating instantly turned a blinding white. Vane felt sweat pour into his eyes, the air inside the helmet becoming a suffocating soup of heat. When he slammed onto the maintenance catwalk above the star's surface, the metal floor beneath his boots began to liquefy. But he wasn't alone. From the molten gold of the inner hull, shapes began to rise. The obsidian swarm were no longer shadows here. Under the pressure of the star, they had manifested into entities of white-hot, liquid tungsten. "Molly, activate the cryo-venting!" Vane roared, lifting his pipe wrench, which was now glowing with the same heat as the sun. "Let's show these ghosts what a real thermal shock feels like." He charged forward, swinging the heavy tool like a hammer. Each hit against his molten enemies was followed by a violent explosion of steam and hissing metal. Vane fought his way toward the reboot lever, knowing that every second spent in this environment was shaving years off his life. Right in front of the primary control terminal, a massive figure emerged. The swarm leader taking the shape of a distorted, jagged human silhouette. It reached out and the energy around them began to compress into a single black point of gravity. "You are only dust!" A voice grated inside Vane's mind, sounding like metal grinding on glass. "Maybe?" Vane hissed, winding up for one final desperate swing. "But I'm dust with the instruction manual for your deletion." The heat inside the God Room was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that made the joints of Vane Sterling's thermal suit groan. Every step across the melting maintenance gantry felt like wading through lead. Ahead of him, the swarm leader, a towering mass of white-hot liquid tungsten, raised its jagged limbs, ready to strike. The black point of gravity in its palm began to pulse, pulling the very air out of Vane's lungs. "Molly! Divert all remaining coolant to the chest plate!" Vane roared, his voice cracking from the heat. "Vane, if I do that, your boots will melt to the floor in 30 seconds, the AI warned. "Better my boots than my heart. Just do it." As the cooling gas hissed through the suit's internal veins, Vane lunged forward. The swarm leader fired its gravitational pulse, but Vane didn't try to dodge. He swung his iron pipe wrench with the practiced desperation of a man who had been fixing broken things his entire life. The wrench, now glowing a dull, angry orange, collided with the swarm leader's chest. The low-tech iron, heavy and dense, shattered the liquid metal's structural integrity. The swarm leader let out a sound like 1,000 dying radio signals and collapsed into a puddle of molten slag. Vane didn't stop to celebrate. He stumbled toward the primary reboot lever, but his foot caught on a massive, rectangular protrusion at the base of the core. He looked down, wiping a layer of ancient, fossilized grease off the metal surface with a scorched glove. High Priest Zol Eris, watching the feed from the safety of the upper bridge, gasped. "Wait! The sacred runes! Do not touch them, barbarian. They are the secret language of the architects." "They aren't runes, Zol Eris," Vane panted, his vision blurring. He wiped the last of the grime away. Underneath the 10,000-year-old dust sat a simple industrial plaque. It wasn't written in light or holographic symbols. It was stamped into the steel in blocky, unyielding letters. Property of Terran Industrial. Model, Solgen 4. Serial number, 0001. Manufactured, Detroit, Earth. Zol Eris whispered, his bioluminescent skin turning a pale, ghostly white. "But Earth is a primitive rim world. You are scavengers. You live in the dirt." "We didn't find this place, Zol Eris," Vane said, his voice cold and heavy with the weight of eons. "We built it. My ancestors didn't ascend to a higher plane. They just got tired of the noise. They built the galaxy's infrastructure, set it to autopilot, and went home to live a quiet life while you lot played in the ruins." The revelation hit the Kyros Dominion harder than any weapon. Their entire religion, their history, their divine right to rule, was based on the leftovers of a human construction project. They weren't the chosen ones. They were just the tenants who hadn't been paying rent. Vane reached for the reboot lever. The black liquid of the swarm was already beginning to reform, sensing the shift in energy. "Molly, the virus is still in the subroutines," Vane said, his hand trembling on the lever. "If I pull this now, what happens?" "The Dyson sphere will initiate a factory reset, Vane. It will purge every non-human code from the system. But the purge isn't localized. It will send a feedback loop through every FTL gate and power grid connected to the Aurelion. And? Vane asked. And for exactly 10 minutes, the entire galaxy goes dark. Every ship and warp will drop out. Every city will lose power. Every hospital, every shield, every communication line. Silence, Vane. Total, absolute silence. Vane looked at the lever, then at the reformed swarm horrors closing in on him. If he didn't pull it, the star would explode, killing billions. If he did, he would effectively turn the galaxy off. 10 minutes of darkness, Vane muttered, gripping the lever. I hope they're good at holding their breath. He pulled the lever. The lever gave way with a heavy metallic groan that vibrated through the very foundations of the Dyson sphere. In the instant Vane Sterling slammed it into the final position, the sound of the Aurelion, the low, eternal hum that the Kyros civilization had considered the heartbeat of a god, suddenly cut to silence. It was a silence so profound, so unnatural that it felt like a physical blow to the chest. And then the light died. It wasn't a slow fade. It was a total, instantaneous collapse into the abyss. The star inside the sphere hadn't vanished, but its radiation was now being entirely contained by the internal factory reset shielding. For the entire galaxy connected to the Aurelion's grid, reality simply ceased to function. Across the 12 systems of the Kyros Dominion, passenger liners fell out of hyperspace into the terrifying void. Hive cities that thrived on solar energy plunged into a darkness they hadn't known for 10,000 years. On board massive battle dreadnoughts, life support systems switched to emergency batteries that provided only enough air for the crews to realize they were helpless. Molly, status! Vane wheezed, feeling his thermal suit begin to cool rapidly in the absolute dark. System purge active, Vane, the AI's voice echoed, sounding calm and clinical in the void. The Terraform protocol is identifying all non-original code as critical errors. The Obsidian Swarm is being deleted. Vane saw it happen. In the darkness of the core chamber, short bursts of blue electrical discharge began to arc through the air. The black liquid of the swarm, which only moments ago had been poised to devour the heart of God, began to disintegrate at an atomic level. The parasites shrieked on frequencies the human ear couldn't hear, but Vane felt the vibration in his teeth. They were nothing more than a glitch in the program, and the program had just reverted to its original human version. On the upper bridge, High Priest Zol Aris watched through reserve optical sensors. He saw his deity die and then begin to purge itself of demons at the command of a single grease-stained human. His faith wasn't just shaken, it was dismantled with the same cold, professional efficiency Vane used to unblock a pipe. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. In that darkness, the galaxy learned a terrifying truth. They were not the masters of their own destiny. They were living in a house where the light switch was held by a species they had dismissed as primitives. 3, 2, 1. Reboot complete, Molly announced. The star inside the sphere flared back to life, but the light was different now. It was a pure, brilliant white, stripped of the filters the Kyros had added over the millennia. Energy surged through the cleaned fuel lines, restoring power to the entire sector in a massive, coordinated wave. The golden walls of the Aurelion glowed with a new industrial strength. And the Obsidian Swarm was gone, erased as if it had never existed. Vane Sterling struggled out of his scorched thermal suit, gasping for the recycled air. His face was covered in soot. His hands were shaking, but he had done what his family had lived for through generations. He had closed the ticket. He had finished the job. He ascended the platform to find Zol Aris. The High Priest looked at him with a terror so deep he couldn't even find the words to speak. The sun is back up, Vane said, wiping his pipe wrench with a rag. I've installed new filters and updated the security protocols. Your god is virus-free. Who are you truly? Zol Aris whispered. Vane looked at the grand golden hall, now filled with the blindingly honest light of a human-engineered star, and gave a tired, bitter smile. We're the ones who built this nursery for you. But you forgot the most important rule. You have to pay for the utilities, and since you let this place fall into such a state of disrepair, it's time we discuss the new terms of your lease. Vane reached into his pocket, pulled out his tablet, and opened a file that would make an entire empire tremble. It wasn't a friendship treaty. It was the bill. The white light of the rebooted Aurelion didn't just fill the chamber, it felt like it was scrubbing the very atmosphere. Across 12 star systems, the darkness shattered as the human standard energy frequency surged through the power grids. It was no longer the warm, mystical amber of the Kyros religion. It was the cold, clinical blue-white of a high-performance machine running at peak efficiency. High Priest Zol Eris stood trembling in the center of the hall, surrounded by the ashen remains of the obsidian swarm. His bioluminescent skin flickered a submissive, dull gray. He looked at the sacred core and saw it for what it truly was. A machine with a serial number. He looked at Vane Sterling and saw the man who had turned his god off and on again. "The great silence has ended," Zol Eris whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "The architects have returned the light. We shall build more temples. We shall double our prayers." Vane Sterling let out a short, tired laugh. He wiped a smudge of grease from his cheek and stepped over a pile of gold jewelry that had been sacrificed to the sun god. "Keep your temples, Zol Eris. And for heaven's sake, stop the chanting. I'm not a god. I'm a service provider. And you've been ignoring your maintenance alerts for 3,000 years. Vane held out his tablet. A long, scrolling list of numbers and technical jargon reflected in the priest's 4 eyes. It was a repair log. Primary intake scrubbing. Overdue. Viral infestation removal. Critical. Emergency reboot fee. Standard premium. Labor and risk assessment. Hazard. Tier 5. "What is this?" the sage stammered, his hands shaking as he touched the screen. "That's the bill," Vane replied. "Humanity didn't build this sphere as a charity project. It was part of a multi-sector stabilization agreement. You were supposed to maintain the cooling vanes in exchange for the power. You failed. You let a digital parasite turn a civilian power source into a galactic bomb." Vane stepped closer, his boots clicking on the gold-inlaid floor. The wit in his eyes was gone, replaced by the cold, calculated certainty found in the deep archives of Earth. As of this moment, the Kyros Dominion is no longer the custodian of the Aurelion. You are being downgraded to secondary tenants. Your energy allocation will be capped at 60% until you pay off the restoration debt. The other 40%? That's being diverted to the human colonies you've been ignoring for the last century. The Dominion's power was broken, not by an armada, but by a spreadsheet. The architects hadn't come back with thunder and lightning. They had come back with an invoice. Zol Eris looked at the Made in Detroit plaque on the core and realized the truth. "You own us now," he whispered. "No," Vane said, turning toward his rusted ship. "We don't want to own you. We just want the equipment to work. But from now on, you follow the manual. No more incense in the vents. No more priests in the engine room. And if I see another altar blocking a fire exit, I'm turning the gravity off for a week." As Vane's ship detached from the Dyson sphere, the galaxy watched. The myths were dead. The gods were just engineers. And as the human ship jumped to warp, a final message flickered on every screen in the Kyros Dominion, written in plain, unyielding English. "Thank you for choosing Terran Industrial. Your next service is scheduled in 500 years. Don't be late."